Hi everyone, welcome to GlideFast On Air. I'm Colleen Kelly, Marketing Specialist at GlideFast Consulting, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. ServiceNow IntegrationHub, is the investment worth it for my organization? Before we get started, we'd like to give you some information on GlideFast. GlideFast Consulting is a consulting firm dedicated exclusively to ServiceNow. As an Elite ServiceNow Partner, our expert team of developers and architects have worked on both sides of the table, the customer side and the consulting side. Our company was founded by ServiceNow architects, and we're proud to have a team of over 100 experienced consultants, an average CSAT score of 4.8 out of 5, and more accolades as you can see here. Throughout the webinar series, we're sharing our goal of raising $50,000 for the Joe Andrewsy Foundation. This foundation provides financial assistance to families battling cancer and the unexpected costs that come with treatment. As a cancer survivor himself, GlideFast CEO Mike Lombardo has committed to matching up to $25K, and GlideFast Consulting as a company will also match up to $25K for a total donation of $100,000 to help pediatric and adult cancer patients. If you or your company would like to contribute to helping us reach our goal, we'll send you a link with more information following the webinar. With that said, I'm excited to hand things over to our presenters, Chris Sanford, Senior Technical Consultant, and Matt Dumont, Service Delivery Manager. Please send in any questions as they arise, and we'll do our best to answer them at the end of the presentation. Chris and Matt, you can take it from here.
Thank you, Colleen. So hi, everyone. Let me start out by just outlining some of the topics that we'd like to discuss today that will hopefully help you to arrive at your own decision as to whether an investment in Integration Hub is worth it for your organization. So what is Integration Hub? We want to start with the basics, as if you don't already have a subscription to Integration Hub, you may not have heard of it or know exactly what it is. We also want to talk about some of the alternatives to Integration Hub, because there's several other methods of handling integration data in the platform. Many of these have existed long before Integration Hub existed, and many of them are still in use today by either legacy applications or even maybe some newly built custom functionality for customers that don't have an Integration Hub subscription. We also want to talk about some of the benefits of Integration Hub. So given that these alternatives exist and many of them do not require any subscription, why would you want to use Integration Hub? And then we also are going to go into talking about and demonstrating some of the technical capabilities of Integration Hub. So we want to talk about the JavaScript APIs, because these are important to know, as they can significantly extend the possibilities of how your Integration Hub spokes can be triggered. We also want to give a quick demo of seeing Integration Hub in action and seeing what it's actually capable of doing. And then finally, we want to talk about some of the new features that were added in the Quebec release and then what significance they may have. So what is Integration Hub? Integration Hub is an application that's built on the Flow Designer engine, and it really feels like a natural extension of it. If you're at all familiar with Flow Designer, then you know that actions are the primary building blocks of flows. And if you've worked extensively with Flow Designer, then you know that within actions, you'll have what's called steps, which are the black box components that you can use to achieve common business requirements with low or no code. So Integration Hub really introduces and extends the Flow Designer in several key ways. One of them is going to be introducing new steps for a lot of the common things that you need to do with integrations like REST and SOAP that can be facilitated with these black box low or no code methods. You also have steps for other protocols like SFTP or SSH or PowerShell that you can do within a Flow Designer flow with low or no code. You also have steps for things that can be helpful for integrations, but also you might have use for them in other areas of the platform, like, for example, parsing out JSON. You're going to use that a lot for receiving the payload from a REST integration, but you might actually have a need to do that using JSON somewhere else in the platform, because JSON is pretty universally used all over the ServiceNow platform. Another way that Integration Hub complements and extends Flow Designer is with new input and output variable types. You have what's called dynamic objects. So without Integration Hub and Flow Designer, then you have to actually build out the structure and hard code it for any of your object input and output variables. So with Integration Hub, you don't have to do that, and you can make it more dynamic. And then finally, with Integration Hub, you have spokes, which are basically collections of flows, subflows, and actions, and also possibly data streams. The four big components of Flow Designer, you'll have groups of them. They're typically grouped by what system they're designed to integrate with. And some of them come directly with the Integration Hub subscription, so you get them in the system as soon as you install and activate Integration Hub. Some of them have to be installed from the store or individually as well. But one thing that generally all of them have in common is that they're very quick to set up. And many times all you have to do is fill out a form with connection data, and then you're good to go with activating your integration. So I also wanted to talk about some of the alternatives to Integration Hub and what some of them can do and what they are. So the first big one that you'll hear about, or that you may have seen if you've worked in ServiceNow for a long time, is system web services. And these are the traditional way of invoking outbound web services, whether it's through REST or SOAP from the ServiceNow platform. And you could set these up by just filling out a form in System Web Services if you're an admin with the necessary connection information, including like the endpoints and any of the query parameters and the authorization information. And if applicable, the request headers and the request body as well. And those were nice. They can also be, one of the nice things about them is you can parameterize them with variable substitutions. So you don't have to actually hard code all of those parameters into the form. You can make them more dynamic. And then once you've created them in the System Web Services table, you can access them in a script using the JavaScript APIs, either REST message v2 or SOAP message v2 if you were using SOAP. And you can set any of those parameters that you defined in the script. So you can get variables in a script anywhere that's using a script, whether it's a business rule or workflow or UI action, and you can get data and pass it in to the web service that way. And then the response body could be either downloaded as an attachment, or it could be returned as a string variable that could then be parsed using JavaScript. So obviously with these REST and SOAP messages, there's a lot of overlap here with what Integration Hub can do. But I think the important takeaway is that integrations that you set up with System Web Services are likely to require a lot of scripting to properly parse the data and also handle more advanced things like pagination. Another one that you may have seen if you've worked in ServiceNow for a long time is orchestration. So orchestration for a while was kind of to the traditional workflow engine what Integration Hub is to Flow Designer. So it introduced what was called content pack libraries, and they would include these low-code integration blocks that were packaged into workflow activities, which are similar to Flow Designer actions. They were kind of the building blocks of workflows and still are today. And generally, the orchestration content packs, they weren't nearly as extensive as far as the number of systems that are available to integrate with as what you'll see in Integration Hub. But prior to Integration Hub, this was by far the easiest way to facilitate things like PowerShell or SSH integrations through a mid server. Without doing that, I wouldn't say it was impossible, but it would require a really heavy level of scripting on the ServiceNow side, in addition to the shell scripting you would have to do for the respective PowerShell or SSH. Now with Integration Hub, a lot of that I think has really become mostly obsolete when you have those steps built into the Flow Designer now for PowerShell, SSH, as well as a few other protocols that have also been introduced over the years. And I also think so even if you prefer the traditional workflows to Flow Designer, which I know a lot of people do, I would still recommend using scripts and APIs within the workflow to invoke your integrations, whether that's through System Web Services or Integration Hub. I would still recommend doing that over the orchestration, which I think is really slowly going to become more and more deprecated for integrating with external sources.
And Chris, I'll just add to that in newer instances, orchestration is not even available anymore. So they are, at least the orchestration piece of workflow is something that they're working towards completely deprecating.
Got it. Yeah. So yeah, that pretty much confirms it, that it kind of in a lot of ways already has been deprecated, and but it's possible it might still be there if you're an older customer, but definitely not something that ServiceNow intends to continue building future developments with. So finally, another integration hub alternative, or another method of integrations that exists in ServiceNow is scripted web services. So these were and really still are in a lot of ways the primary way to facilitate inbound integrations into ServiceNow from external webhooks, especially when like the out of the box API endpoints can't achieve the desired functionality that you want. So scripted web services are very flexible. So you can build a script to manipulate the data that gets received by a webhook and do anything that you need with it in the platform that you could achieve through a JavaScript API. The most common use case is going to be updating the database, but then you could also do things like make a decision in what's called decision tables, which is a more recently introduced piece of functionality. You could also trigger a workflow or flow designer, just to name a few other things. Really anything that you could do with a JavaScript API, you could do in a scripted REST API or a scripted SOAP API if you were so inclined. And the scripted web services are still very relevant, I think, for a lot of applications today, including even out of the box ones. I think you're going to see a lot of scripted web services just because they're so flexible for handling inbound integrations. This may change in the future, as they did just release the ability to trigger flow designer flows from REST, but for right now, it's still a very common method for triggering a lot of things. And like I said, you could trigger flows through it. So even before you could directly make that a trigger in your flow, you could just create a system web service and invoke the API to trigger the flow. And that's still necessary for things like if you have attachments in your payload. In fact, that was actually something that we ran into when we were trying to set up the demo that you'll see later in this webinar. Okay, so I also wanted to talk about, what are the benefits of Integration Hub? So given that those other alternatives exist, what are you really going to get out of subscription to Integration Hub? So I think the biggest thing is that you have out of the box spokes, so that's going to be a collection, like I said, of those flows, subflows, and actions and data streams, and they're all built out of the box. So you're not going to have to build extensive code to set up your integrations and manipulate the data. They also have access to the latest APIs that are available in a lot of cases. So that means APIs are constantly being updated by vendors. Like I know Microsoft does that pretty heavily, and just about every vendor is constantly updating their APIs. And with Integration Hub, you're automatically going to have those updated, and you might even get access to like beta APIs or things that are not even fully documented yet, that ServiceNow might have some inside information on, in being able to get that functionality working early. And so you can see early access to do things that you might not otherwise know how to do, or that it might seem isn't possible by looking at the documentation for for the vendor's API. So I think that the out of the box integrations is that's a huge benefit, and pretty much all of the new developments for out of the box integrations are all going through IntegrationHub. You also have some of the technical limitations that you saw in some of the alternatives that you can get past with IntegrationHub. One of the big ones is like the 10 megabyte limit on what you could store in a string in JavaScript. So that was really limiting when you had those larger payloads, and there were ways around it, but they were typically very convoluted and involved a lot of heavy lifting on the development side and might be difficult to maintain. So with IntegrationHub, you have what's called data streams, which are a specific type of action designed to handle pagination of larger payloads and to provide an easy way to cycle through them in JavaScript without having to store a huge chunk of data into memory as a single variable. You also have like pre-built lookup tables for handling things like what's called delta links. I've seen those specifically actually in some of the Azure integrations. So what a delta link is it will actually, every time a particular resource accesses that API, it will, the system will keep track of it, and it will return in the response a link to be used the next time that same system is accessing that same API. So that way it will keep track of what data was returned the last time, and then it will only send data that's been updated or changed since the last time it was updated. So like if you need to check group membership of like Office 365 groups, then you don't have to parse through the entire payload of all group memberships every time the API is accessed. It will just automatically, through those delta links, return only the data that was changed since the last time you looked at it. And then finally, IntegrationHub is low code, which means there's less maintenance. And so it's not completely codeless, and you'll find when you're building actions with steps using IntegrationHub that there's still a lot of places for you to put in scripts with manipulating data and getting inputs and outputs. But I think you'll also find when you're using IntegrationHub, when you do have to do scripting, it tends to be a lot more focused on achieving the particular goal that one chunk of the step is meant for. So that means you're gonna have smaller pieces of code that are designed to achieve something quickly, rather than having to build an entire script include with hundreds of lines of code to go through the whole process from beginning to end. So with less code, it's easier to maintain in a lot of cases. All right, so I'll hand it over to Matt now to talk about some of the technical capabilities of IntegrationHub.
Thanks, Chris. I apologize in advance for my voice. I'm just getting over a cold. Okay, so for what Chris talked about was sort of bite-sized code pieces that you can use throughout your flow. He also kind of mentioned that you wouldn't necessarily look at this as a direct replacement for workflow, but more look at it as a series of like plug-and-play code pieces that can be used all throughout the system. And to that point, there's a pretty good list of IntegrationHub and really Flow Designer APIs that can be utilized throughout the system to trigger those flows. And there's a lot of opportunity for handoff between Flow and Workflow Editor. You can trigger workflows from a Flow Designer flow. You can actually trigger Flow Designer flows from any of the normal scripting types like business rules and from other flows from anywhere in the system. And then you can also, using the scripted REST API interfaces, you can trigger these flows from external sources, which we're going to demonstrate in a little bit. But that flexibility with the APIs, it kind of existed before with Workflow Editor, but they're really serving different purposes, and that Flow Designer gives you a much easier way to package up pieces of your code. And then when you add in the fact that there's all of the pre-built spokes that you can integrate into those flows, it makes it easier to just pick and choose what steps you want to apply. And I'll also demonstrate a little bit of that in the demo portion. So these are just a couple examples, very simple ones. There's a lot of different things you can do with the APIs. I was going to demonstrate very quickly, or at least show what a data stream flow activity will look like. But that's one of the newer features, I think, as of New York. Within Flow Designer, you can create activities that they refer to them as data streams, and they're basically what Chris was talking about. They help handle large amounts of data from an endpoint. So they're pre-built in such a way that you can set up your REST call or SOAP call or whatever integration you want, pull back the data, and then automatically build in pagination and account for different ways of paginating through data. So this always goes back to that idea of, it's not that you can't do these things through script. And in fact, ServiceNow still has ways for you to do that. But having come from a background of developing custom APIs, a lot of you are probably familiar with that ongoing problem of every time a new integration has to be built, you're going to have to look through all the standards for that integration. You have to find the right API endpoints. A lot of times the customer or the team that owns the product that you're trying to integrate with doesn't really know anything about the API set, so they don't have a lot of documentation. There's a lot of things you have to dig through for each integration. And what this does is it gives you the opportunity, if you don't have a team of developers dedicated to this, to take advantage of someone having done that work for you up front, and then to very easily plug and play a lot of times these activities. And so for the data stream, that is something that has been expanded on over time, because Flow Designer didn't really have a great way to support that large data set. And this is a constant evolution in the Flow Designer, these new features that allow for things that you might not have been able to do before. And then things like the scriptable flow runner and the flow result are just APIs that allow you to trigger the flows and to receive a result from that trigger, and actually in this special object that you can cycle through and get all the information out of it that you need. And then real quickly, we'll just go over a couple things that are in Quebec. This is just a sampling of some of the items that you can see on the release notes. But I'm going to actually demonstrate. I'm not going to actually build a flow out, but I am going to show you what the trigger flows from REST looks like, because they have now added a way that you can even build out an API endpoint from the flow directly from Flow Designer and trigger the flow. And it's essentially just a pre-built scripted REST API, but it allows for a more data-based approach to building it out instead of writing in the scripts and having to know how to structure your API endpoint. Just another thing, a little addition that helps with making some things, as Chris said, not necessarily no code, but low code, so that it's a lot easier to implement at a faster rate. And then there are some added integration steps. There's the JDBC step type, which is a pretty nice addition. Again, you could do that through script, but it just takes that extra legwork out. SFTP is another one that is a nice addition, and all of these things are being added as they come up. And I'm sure that a lot of this is based on feedback from developers who looked at Flow Designer and said, well, that's kind of cool, but it only supports this and I need to do this. And so that, I think I want to point out that that's one thing that's sort of an added benefit of using the Integration Hub as opposed to other methods, because it is the recommended way to do integrations for ServiceNow. They're working very diligently to continue to upgrade and improve that set of options that you have. And that includes the spokes. There's constantly new integration spokes coming out as the technologies come out. And then there's additions to the actual Flow Designer and Integration Hub packages that are constantly improving. So as far as upgradability and staying on the cutting edge of the technology, using Flow Designer and at least some portion of it, Integration Hub can help you do that without a lot of trouble. When you customize these integrations, a lot of times you build it and then within a few months or a year, the APIs that you accessed are deprecated, or the things that you built into it are maybe not the latest and greatest way to do it. So this is just one way to kind of help with that. And then the last piece that we wanted to bring up about Quebec was, you may not be familiar with the process flows, but one of the newer features as well in Flow Designer is these process flows that can be integrated with the workspaces, and they're geared more towards like question answer kind of steps that you can build actual automations into. But it can be used for a lot of different things. But one of the primary opportunities for it is in support, where you're working tickets or you have a team that needs to be able to follow certain steps for certain questions or actions, and you can build those into Flow Designer. So this new feature allows for process flow syncing across all of your instances. If you have multiple environments, it can make that a lot simpler process. So those are just some of the cool things that are coming out with Quebec. If you dig through the release notes, there's several things we weren't even able to get to that look like they might be pretty cool additions as well. But for now, let me just give you a quick demo of some of the features we talked about, just to give you an idea of what a simple integration hub integration could look like. All right, so what we have here is I am going to run a simple Python script from my desktop that is just in the same folder as an attachment. And we just wanted to really show how easy it is to start building an integration out. This functionality uses mostly Flow Designer for this piece of the demo, but there's a lot of places you could really benefit from adding in Integration Hub features that I'll actually demonstrate that very briefly after we do a quick test. I'm just going to run import requests. And this is just a really simple file that runs sends a REST message over to an integration endpoint that we've set up on our instance, and attaches this file that was in the same folder. So I've generated an incident and attached that file here, but that doesn't really show you a whole lot. So what I'm going to do is open up the executions list for that flow and show what we actually saw in the background. When we triggered this file on my desktop here, all this file says to do is send a REST message over to this predefined scripted REST API, grab this file and send it over in a binary file. So all the rest of the work is really being done by the instance. And here we've just created this scripted REST API. It's very simple. It says post attachment. And in this case, we just used the out of the box APIs that we talked about, and we sent the file over, generated the attachment, and moved it over to triggered this flow that then moved it over to the incident that we're going to create within the flow. So when we said trigger flow, it just kicked off this subflow that can be triggered from the API. We created a simple incident record, and then retrieved the record and moved the attachment to that record. Some really simple Flow Designer steps, but just demonstrating that you can actually do some pretty cool things with even complex data sets like attachments and images, just using the out-of-the-box Flow Designer. But we're here to talk about Integration Hub. So let's take what we have here, and very briefly, we're going to do a quick addition to it, just to show how easy it can be. So before this demo, I actually created a webhook for my sandbox Slack instance. I'm going to pull this over here because that webhook has some information in it that I don't want to share. Just really quickly grab that webhook information and drop it into the activity. So what I'm doing here is I'm we showed that it was very easy to just create an internal incident. But with Integration Hub, the point of having the tool is to be able to integrate externally without having to script out a bunch of work, and to send to another platform or to pull information from another platform. So I'm going to just send a quick update to my Slack using this webhook to let me know that that incident was actually created. So I've put my information in here. I'm going to save and publish. Now, the most of the legwork was on the Slack side, where I just had to build an integration app that lets me generate a webhook and send a message directly to, if it finishes publishing, directly to my sandbox once the incident is created. All right, so now that we've got this published, if I come back here and I run my same file, I can go see that the incident was generated. So I have the incident, the new incident was created with the attachment. And then just simply by adding that webhook step, I was able to send a notification to my sandbox with the incident details. And all that was pre-built. All I did was provide it the webhook. The authentication is all determined ahead of time with a shared secret that's included in the webhook, among other things. And so all of that is done up front. And then the point of having it within Flow Designer or within Integration Hub is that legwork can be done by your developers. It doesn't have to be, I mean, obviously it's not something that you would just hand off to a business user and say, here, go build out this integration. But once that webhook is there, once the legwork is done for the code, then it's as simple as dragging this over for anybody who wants to build a flow. And these can be done within scoped applications. They can be done as by developers or by business users, however you break down the access. But it's very easy to add something like that into a flow and be off to the races. So that's really what we want to conclude with as far as value out of Integration Hub. It's really down to what you need and what you want to accomplish. But because they're so flexible in the way that they can be triggered, you could do something as simple as saying that you want to use a workflow for your change management process, but you want to be able to let people generate change tasks once the change hits a certain state. You can very easily set up a record trigger that checks the state and generates certain tasks that they've defined in that case, and then looks at a field like the company to decide whose it is and which tasks to trigger. It could be as simple as that. It could be as complex as doing a full PowerShell integration with some other environment where you have to be able to run PowerShell to access it, or if it's a legacy environment. The point is, it gives you a way to build these simple scripts and put them into flows very quickly and easily. And that's really all that we're saying here. Is not necessarily that it's supposed to replace other functionality entirely, or that it's the greatest option for everything. But if it is for what you need, then it can be very powerful. So very briefly, we'll go to questions in just a second. I was just going to show you some of these new features that we talked about. There's a new additional trigger that you can select for your flows now called the REST API Asynchronous. And once you select that, all you have to do is fill out the basic methods, the path. You can put some requirements for role. You can tell it what body type you need and what values within the body. You can tell it to include query parameters. And then as soon as you publish, it generates that endpoint that's specified here. And you're pretty much ready to go at that point. You obviously need to make sure you have users with the right credentials, et cetera. But this is one another packaged way that you can actually generate those endpoints pretty quickly. We talked about data stream. Data stream is just a way to process a lot of data quickly, but it does allow you to go through and create your request information, decide what type of step you're creating, turn on the pagination and choose different types. You can do parsing and mapping afterwards using some of the standard types of libraries and functionality that you're used to. And I can almost guarantee this is probably going to expand over time as new requests and new standards come out. So this is just another thing where they're just trying to make that job easier. You could just as easily go create a REST message and try to do all of that pagination and parsing yourself. This is just another tool at your disposal. And then the last one I wanted to show was the custom actions you can create. So you always have the ability to script within a Flow Designer flow without Integration Hub. What Integration Hub gives you, among other things, is access to these different custom types that can be used within the flows, which is similar to what Orchestration did, where once you were past that orchestration wall, you had access to a lot of these custom types of steps. The process for building them is a little bit cleaner, but it's a lot of plug and play and data pills and things like that. So these are just some of the things that you can get out of Integration Hub. I'll go ahead and open it up for questions, and we can see if we can answer any of those.
Great presentation and demo. Thanks, Chris and Matt, for putting that together. We did have a few questions come in from the audience, so we'll take some time right now to dive into those. So question 1, does Integration Hub require a mid server to work?
Yeah, so I think I can answer that one. So it really depends on the type of integration that you're going to be building. Mid server, definitely if you're trying to connect to anything that's on-prem or behind a firewall, definitely if you're going to try to use anything like a PowerShell step or an SSH step, you're going to have to get behind the mid server to actually be able to access those host machines that the ServiceNow platform as a SaaS is not going to have direct access to. But generally, if you're going through like a REST or SOAP or a web service that is accessible over the internet without any firewall restrictions, you can do that without a mid server. So it really depends on the type of integration that you're building, but you don't need any sort of extra subscription to set up a mid server, and it's really pretty easy to do.
Thanks, Chris. Another question we have in here is, what is Integration Hub ETL, and is it licensed separately from Integration Hub?
Yeah. So that's another good question. And so it is actually completely separate from Integration Hub. Despite the name Integration Hub ETL, it's not that closely connected with Integration Hub. Integration Hub ETL is really like a front end that ServiceNow has built for these what's called robust transformers. It's almost like the newer phase of transform maps. Specifically, they work very well with CMDB integrations because they let you go through what's called the IRE, the Identification and Reconciliation Engine, without a whole bunch of scripting like you'd have to do with a transform map. That's really just designed to set up coalesce field as a primary key. So Integration Hub ETL has a lot of uses, but maybe they call it that because it's oftentimes doing an ETL off of data that's coming from an import set that may have been gathered with Integration Hub. But besides that, it is completely separate, and it's actually free to install Integration Hub ETL. Now you do have to be careful because there are a lot of like what's called service graph connectors designed to connect with specific systems, and those are often do require licensing, but it is completely separate from Integration Hub. It's generally more closely tied to ITOM. That said, of course, it's always a good idea to talk to your ServiceNow account rep to be 100% sure about any licensing concerns you may have. But in general, ETL, despite its name, is completely separate from Integration Hub.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Chris. Looks like we have one more question in here from the audience. And that is, how do I migrate legacy custom integrations into IntegrationHub?
What I would recommend, as far as if I were to have to do that process, the first thing I would do is go and sort out, kind of organize what my legacy integrations are, what types they are, SOAP, REST, what are the standards, what systems are being integrated, and depending on how those group together, one of the nice things, one of the nice things about Flow Designer is that once you build actions, you don't necessarily have to build them again, because you can build them to accept different inputs. The downside to coming from legacy is that there's not an easy way to just point and click move everything over that I've integrated, especially if you're using a lot of scripts. But what you can do is, like I said, if you determine that you have a lot of PowerShell scripts, or you have a lot of SOAP messages that you're sending out, you can find ways to standardize those into actions that are reusable, so that you just create a set of inputs, you package up those inputs, and then they just change depending on what flow you're running or what your integration is. And then you're set as far as the grouping of code that you were using before to build out all of that functionality. And then you're just down to passing in inputs, which is a much simpler process than trying to rewrite the code over and over again in each flow and for each integration. I don't know if that answers the whole question, because it really does come down to your organization and what your integrations look like and how legacy we're talking. But I would say that's a place to start.
Yeah, and I would say just to add to that if you do have legacy integrations that you're thinking about migrating into IntegrationHub, you should be able to set that up in a non-prod environment, even if you don't have a subscription. And seeing if you're able to do that might actually be a good test as to whether an investment in IntegrationHub is worth it for you or not, because depending on the complexity of that integration, it may be something that you can simply do with an out-of-the-box spoke in IntegrationHub, and it may not be. So it's definitely something that's worth looking into.
Cool. We actually just had one more question come in. Also, I'll answer it live so you guys can see it here. Are there any performance issues if there are multiple flow operations at a given time? To put it simply, is there any limit to the number of flow operations the system can perform without performance issues?
I can answer this one because I have some experience with this. In a particular implementation that we did, there was a series of flows that were running, triggering on a table where inserts were happening constantly. There were thousands of flows running. I would say I would not recommend that, but that's based on a pretty standard understanding of how systems work in general. I would recommend that you have some sort of gateways or restrictions in place so that you're not running thousands and thousands of flows at the same time. That's not to say the system can't handle it, but anything that you have, especially coming from an external source, if you're doing anything from external integrations or anything that you have triggering based on just an unverifiable number of records being created, I would say put some sort of limitation on it. And Flow Designer does have some of that out of the box. There's options to say don't run concurrent flows. So basically, if one flow is already running on this record, do not run another one. You can have ones that say trigger this flow only once. And those kinds of limitations, or you can come up with your own just to make sure that you're not overwhelming the system. Because each flow essentially generates a scheduled activity that's using up a thread on your instance, and depending on how much resource you have allocated to your instance, eventually too many flows could cause some harm to the ability of the instance to continue functioning. So that's just my general opinion on the subject. Chris, you want to add anything?
Yeah, sure. And another thing I would add to that is if you find yourself in a situation where you're concerned about running too many flows in parallel, I would say really question whether it's really necessary to do it through running a whole bunch of flows in parallel like that, or could you do it in a single flow? Because you might be surprised to the answer to that. There's a lot of what's called flow logics that exist in flow designer that are designed for things like iteration, or if it's something like pagination, then that's really what Integration Hub is built to deal with. So even handling huge chunks of data, you might be surprised what you can actually get done in a single flow.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Martin, for your feedback in the chat. And it looks like someone asked if where the recording of this will be. So it will be up on our YouTube channel, and all the attendees will get sent a link to the recording following the webinar. So it looks like that's all the questions we have for today. We'd like to thank everyone for attending. We hope you enjoyed. If you have any more questions, please feel free to reach out to us at info@glidefast.com. Check out our website to sign up for more webinars. Thanks, everyone.